The room fell silent the moment the lawyer read the final line of the will. Mr. Richard Hale leaves everything he owns to his maid, Maria Lopez. For a second, nobody moved. Then the courtroom exploded. Richard's son Daniel jumped to his feet. "This is a lie," he shouted. His sister Victoria pointed at Maria with pure hatred in her eyes. "She manipulated him! She stole our father's fortune!" Reporters rushed forward. Cameras flashed. Lawyers started arguing. And standing in the middle of the chaos was Maria, a simple maid who had spent 7 years cleaning Richard Hale's mansion. Her hands trembled. Tears filled her eyes. She looked at the lawyer and whispered, "There must be some mistake." But the lawyer calmly shook his head. "There is no mistake." The crowd became even louder. Richard Hale had been one of the richest men in America. His empire was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Luxury hotels, office towers, private jets, investments across the world. Everything now belonged to a woman who earned a modest salary cleaning his house. Nobody understood why. But the truth began many years earlier. Richard Hale had everything money could buy, yet he lived a lonely life. His wife had died years ago. His children cared more about his money than his health. Every time they visited, they asked for investments, properties, or access to trust funds. Nobody asked how he was feeling. Nobody sat beside him when he was sick. Nobody stayed after dinner. They always had somewhere more important to be. Then there was Maria. Every morning she greeted him with a smile. Every evening she made sure he had taken his medicine. When his health declined, she was often the only person sitting beside his bed. She never asked for money, never asked for favors, never expected anything. One rainy evening, Richard collapsed while walking down the stairs. The mansion staff panicked. Maria rushed to him and called emergency services. Doctors later said that if help had arrived just a few minutes later, he would have died. When Richard woke up in the hospital, neither Daniel nor Victoria was there. Only Maria sat beside his bed. Richard looked at her and asked quietly, "Why are you here?" Maria smiled. "Because you shouldn't be alone." Those simple words stayed in his mind for months. As Richard's health continued to decline, he started noticing things he had ignored for years. His children only appeared when money was involved. One day Daniel arrived demanding $10 million for a business project. Richard refused. Daniel became furious. "It's my inheritance anyway," he snapped before storming out. Another day Victoria demanded ownership of one of his hotels. When Richard said no, she didn't call for weeks. The loneliness hurt more than the illness. One night Richard sat alone in his study looking through old photographs. Among them was a picture from 25 years ago. He stared at it for a long time before opening a locked drawer. Inside was a faded envelope containing documents he had hidden for decades. Documents connected to the greatest regret of his life. 25 years earlier, Richard had been involved in a secret relationship before marrying his wife. The woman had become pregnant. Terrified of scandal and pressure from powerful business partners, Richard made a decision he regretted every day afterward. The woman disappeared before he could make things right. Years later he learned she had died shortly after giving birth. The baby girl had vanished into the foster system. Richard spent decades searching for her but never found her. It became the one mistake he could never fix. Meanwhile, Maria knew very little about her own past. She had grown up in foster homes. She possessed only one old photograph left with her as a baby, and a silver necklace she had worn since childhood. She never knew who her parents were. One afternoon while cleaning Richard's study, Maria accidentally dropped a box. Papers scattered across the floor. As she gathered them, Richard suddenly noticed the silver necklace around her neck. His face turned pale. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Maria looked surprised. "I've always had it." Richard stared at the necklace in disbelief. It was identical to one he had given the woman he loved decades ago. That night Richard couldn't sleep. The next day he quietly arranged a DNA test without telling anyone. Weeks later the results arrived. Richard opened the envelope with shaking hands. The result confirmed what seemed impossible. Maria was his daughter, his lost daughter. The child he had searched for over 20 years had been living under his roof the entire time. Richard broke down crying. For the first time in years, he felt both overwhelming joy and unbearable guilt. He wanted to tell Maria immediately, but fear stopped him. How could he explain that he had failed her for 25 years? How could he ask forgiveness? Before he found the courage, another problem emerged. Richard discovered that Daniel had been secretly stealing money from company accounts. Millions had disappeared through fraudulent transactions. When Richard confronted him, Daniel denied everything. But the evidence was clear. Richard realized his own son had betrayed him. That night he made a decision. He called his lawyer and changed his will. Everything would go to Maria, not because she was his maid, because she was his daughter and the only person who had truly cared for him. Richard also recorded a video explaining everything. A few weeks later, his condition worsened. Doctors warned that he had little time left. Maria stayed by his side almost every day. One evening Richard held her hand and whispered, "You've brought more kindness into my life than anyone else." Maria smiled sadly. "You should rest." Richard looked at her for a long moment, wanting to tell her the truth, but before he could, he slipped into unconsciousness. 3 days later, Richard Hale died. His funeral attracted business leaders, politicians, and celebrities. Daniel and Victoria delivered emotional speeches about how much they loved their father. Maria stood quietly in the back, knowing those speeches were lies. Then came the reading of the will. After the courtroom erupted, Daniel immediately filed a lawsuit. He claimed Maria had manipulated an elderly man. Victoria supported him. News channels covered the case nonstop. The public became divided. Some believed Maria was innocent. Others accused her of being a gold digger. The pressure became unbearable. Strangers insulted her online. Reporters followed her everywhere. One evening someone threw a brick through her apartment window. Attached was a note that read, "Give back what isn't yours." Maria cried herself to sleep. She considered walking away from everything. But then Richard's lawyer called. "There's something you need to see," he said. A week later the courtroom filled again. This time the lawyer presented Richard's recorded video. The screen lit up. Richard appeared sitting in a hospital room. The room fell silent. "If you are watching this," Richard began, "then I am gone. My children will likely accuse Maria of manipulation. They are wrong." Daniel rolled his eyes. Victoria crossed her arms. Richard continued, "Maria never asked me for money. She never asked for anything. In fact, she repeatedly encouraged me to spend more time with my family." Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Then Richard's expression became serious. "There is something nobody knows." The tension became unbearable. "Maria Lopez is my daughter." The room froze. Maria's eyes widened. Daniel stared at the screen in shock. Victoria looked like she couldn't breathe. Richard continued. 25 years ago I made a terrible mistake. I lost the chance to be a father to her. I searched for years and finally found her, but I was too ashamed to tell her the truth. The DNA results are included with this recording." The lawyer immediately presented official documents. The judge examined them carefully. The results were undeniable. Maria collapsed into tears. Everything she believed about her life changed in an instant. She wasn't just a maid. She wasn't alone. She had a father. And despite his mistakes, he had loved her enough to spend years searching for her. But the biggest shock was still coming. The lawyer opened another file. "There is one more matter." Daniel looked nervous. The lawyer presented evidence of financial fraud involving millions of dollars stolen from Richard's companies. Bank transfers, secret accounts, forged approvals. Everything pointed to Daniel. The courtroom erupted again. Daniel's face turned white. "This is fake," he shouted, but the evidence was overwhelming. Investigators soon launched a criminal case. Daniel's empire of lies collapsed overnight. Victoria, fearing her own involvement would be exposed, agreed to cooperate with authorities. Within months, Daniel was convicted. The same reporters who once called Maria a gold digger now called her the rightful heir. Yet the money wasn't what mattered most to her. After the legal battles ended, Maria visited her father's grave. She placed flowers beside the headstone and sat quietly for a long time. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I wish we had more time," she whispered. The wind moved gently through the trees. For the first time in her life, she knew where she came from. She knew she had been loved. And she knew that the man everyone called a billionaire had died carrying one final dream: to make things right. Over the following years, Maria used much of the fortune to create scholarships for foster children and housing programs for families in need. She wanted to help people who felt forgotten, just as she once had. The public admired her not because she inherited millions, but because she never let money change her heart. And whenever people asked why she gave away so much, she always gave the same answer: "The greatest gift my father left me wasn't his money. It was the chance to help others." And in the end, the maid who was treated like she was invisible became the person who changed thousands of lives. Proving that kindness is worth more than any fortune, and that sometimes the person standing quietly in the corner is the one who deserves everything. Blood may create family, but love is what makes it real.